Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, mess with minors and my job? Lose your job and your boyfriend. 1 hour of uninterrupted break. Ignore me when I tell you the counterfeit machine is broken? Enjoy $40 in counterfeit bills. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Mess with minors and my job? Lose your job and your boyfriend. Hey folks, first post in here, hopefully it fits here. Throwaway because some folks in the story may know my Reddit, so you know safety and all. Also done on mobile, sorry for formatting. Alright, circa 2014 I worked for a large movie theater chain in a small Midwestern city. Job was pretty awesome outside of the shit pay and essentially no way to move up. I like to think I am good at my job, and I try my hardest no matter where I work. In this particular situation, I was one of the most tenured employees at the theater save for two other folks who had worked their part-time on the side, and had full-time jobs elsewhere. So for the sake of this story, I need to tell you about Jane, not actual name. Jane started working for the theater 2 months before me. They worked elsewhere as a supervisor, and was looking to move up at the theater. Right after I started, one of the managers left to work at a different theater, and the supervisor moved up. We had two managers, one general manager, basically the highest level at the theater, and a supervisor, which is a manager in training. This is important. Jane somehow got the supervisor position, even though there was another person who essentially was promised the position due to their continued service at the theater for almost 8 years. There were rumors about Jane sleeping with the GM when she started, and this situation got them going again. I didn't care too much because why would I am but a lowly peon in the corporate machine. Anyways, Jane moved up and the tenured crew member left the company because they got screwed over. Once Jane moved up, we had a whole meeting about her moving up, and how the theater focuses on professionalism and ensuring no favoritism was happening. Specifically referencing how normal crew members shouldn't fraternize outside of work with management. Jane didn't really listen to that though. She continued to hang out with the crew members who were mostly underage, and would do various things like go drinking with minors, taking them to bars and buying them drinks, or simply buying alcohol at a store and letting them drink at her house. I honestly have no issue with the drinking at home deal, just adding context, as well smoke weed with them and post pictures on Instagram. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Jane had a secret Instagram where they would post pictures of themselves with their friends from the theater. They chose Instagram because none of their family or their boyfriend used Instagram and no one would know, right? Even more damning was her relationship with a 19-year-old that worked at the theater. She had a boyfriend who had been with her for years and honestly supported her for all intents and purposes. Not only did she have a 19-year-old side piece, but also was messing around with a 17-year-old. I even caught them messing around in the break room one time. She essentially threatened me with my job if I told anyone. Honestly, she could have just told me to please be quiet, and I would have just judged her silently. Fast forward about a year or so, and another one of the managers left for a new job. Jane obviously moved up and someone else took the supervisor position. Now I won't go into too much detail, but despite my tenure and performance, I was looked over for the promotion. A newer crew member who was really good friends with Jane got the position over me. This was confirmed by the other manager, who let me know that Jane was definitely in good with the GM, who ultimately made the final decision. That being said, I was beginning to sour and making minimum wage for years at a job that couldn't give a shit about my efforts and continued performance. That being said, I was preparing for an exit. Before I get into my exit, it is important to note that Jane had and most likely still has a problem with me. I have talked about some issues I had with her, but I never escalated or even confronted her about anything she did to me up to this point. I honestly left it be. But I didn't like her, and the fact I didn't like her or play along with her bullshit infuriated her. So much to the point where she made my life hell at the theater. When she was a supervisor, she didn't have much power, but when she became manager, she began giving me shit shifts, convincing people that I was weird and to avoid me. I mean, I am weird, but not like avoid me weird, threatening me physically, threatening my job. Her and her gang of misfit assholes also slashed my tires. I have no solid proof, but my car was parked in the employee lot, and you know only employees can get in. Beyond that, she also made fun of my girlfriend, my now wife, for having an invisible illness, MS. She would make her life hell because she had a disability and had some minor limitations. Add together all of this, plus my GF went off to college, plus getting looked over for the promotion, suffice it to say I found a new job. I had a few close friends at the theater, including my now wife who I met while working there, silver lining right. I had let a few of them know about the new job, but told them to keep it on the DL since it was still 2 weeks away. I had put my 2 weeks in with the GM and asked that he also keep it on the DL since Jane and her posse would fuck with me. I told him that I wanted to tell everyone myself, so it kept him quiet. Now the important thing about my new job is that it essentially paid me double my wages from the theater. All of my friends were stoked for me. I was taking a job that would also have me making more than the managers at the theater, but also a job that put me on a better track in life. That being said, with Jane and I butting heads on multiple occasions and her track record of messing with me, she decided to get one last attack on me. She started a rumor that I was just going to call out on all of my shifts the 2 weeks before my new job started. With her last act of revenge in motion, the GM approached me and let me know that he wouldn't be scheduling me the last 2 weeks. I tried to explain to him that the rumors were bullshit, that I needed to work because it would be my only source of income. I told him that Jane started the rumor, and I started to tell him all of the other stuff as well. He of course didn't believe me and told me that Jane wouldn't do what I was saying she would do. So it was her word versus mine. I contacted my new job, who let me know that my start date was firm, and that their budget wouldn't allow me to start until 2 weeks later as originally planned. Now here I am essentially jobless for 2 weeks. Now I was upset, but I was also lucky. I was still living with family and didn't have to pay rent, so I sucked it up and essentially told myself that I would just take a forced 2-week vacation. But Jane didn't stop there. She escalated again by having one of her cronies call my new job and tell them that I got fired. I was luckily able to talk down my new boss by letting him know that this wasn't the case, that I put my 2 weeks in and everything else, but that was the last straw. I left my last day at the theater, and while it was sad and I was upset that I wouldn't be able to work out the last 2 weeks of my job that I had for years, I was focused and determined on revenge. Rule number 1 of living a secret life and having a secret Instagram is not add everybody and their mother to the page. I had a friend of a friend who also didn't care for Jane. Let's call them Joe. Joe and I had gone to high school together and briefly worked at the theater together. He and Jane were part of the same group at the theater until they had a small falling out. Nothing crazy, but he wasn't exactly happy with her. I talked to Joe and we discussed my issues with Jane over some lunch that I bought for him. Food is the key to all revenge plots. Once we ate and discussed my problems with Jane, I asked for his help. I needed access to her Instagram. You know, the secret one, showing her hanging out with underage employees, drinking alcohol and smoking weed with them, and also some mushy posts about her 19-year-old boyfriend, as well as some moderately racy photos with her 17-year-old fling. With very little discussion, he gave me full access. I took screenshots of essentially everything. We are talking 2 to 3 years worth of illicit and moderately illegal activity. More than enough to get her fired and to raise some questions in her relationship. I took the screenshots and I printed them on the most high-quality paper/material that CVS had to offer. I also copied them to a few flash drives for good measure. I purchased 2 yellow padded envelopes, can never be too safe, and I filled them both with copies of all of the posts as well as a flash drive with additional copies. As well, I included a note in each one for the appropriate parties. One of the envelopes was taped to the back door of the theater. There was somewhat of a blind spot, so pulled into the parking lot from the rear and snuck around the corner Mission Impossible style to tape the envelope to the back door. On it was the GM's name, as well. In the letter I merely stated that one of their managers had a secret Instagram with a lot of damning evidence of not only favoritism, but also fraternizing with underage employees amongst other wrongdoings. In the letter I also requested her immediate termination, or the information would be provided to the district manager as well as our corporate office. I made sure to put it somewhere the GM would see on his morning sweep when he opened the theater. The second folder and letter was delivered to her home by Joe. Joe agreed to this as I knew Jane's schedule and had a good idea of when she would be gone, and he knew where she lived from previous hangouts. With both folders delivered, it was only a matter of time. Before I knew it, I was receiving death threats from Jane's gang. All of them saying that they knew it was me and that Jane was going to come after me, that she never did anything to deserve this. It didn't matter to me, of course. I no longer worked there and would hopefully never have to deal with them again. From what I heard, she was taken into the main office of the theater and the GM let her have it. He ultimately had to fire her because there was very clear proof that she was in direct violation of many of the rules and conditions of her employment. As well, her boyfriend with proof in hand kicked her out of his home. Last I heard, she moved farther north and hasn't held down a solid job since. Her family didn't want much to do with her once everything came out with her cheating on her boyfriend. Also, the part about fooling around with a 17-year-old tends not to sit well. In the end, I started my new job without fail and moved on from that place. Haven't seen much of anyone from there since. 1 hour of uninterrupted break. Years ago, I was the manager of a small grocery store. I hated it. Bonuses were removed, hours were long, terms of employment were harsh. I took the job to fill a gap in employment and got stuck there for almost a year until I found something else. All that being said, I put solid effort and time into it to get it right despite it being the worst job of my life. I eventually put in my 2 weeks. I was the last of the batch of managers still employed that were in my higher group. Most got fired for not meeting unrealistic expectations and others just quit because it was so bad. On the last day of my 2 weeks, the district manager was coming by to collect my keys. He was a major part of why the job was so miserable. As DM, he gave us our hours that we could schedule. But since his bonus depended on how well we came in under hours, he shaved off time and made the salaried management work harder. I found out later he was shaving off one full-time employee from most stores every week. He would always berate us for not working hard enough even if we were working 80 hours a week. All the while he was working from home, and we could hear his kid in the background of our conference calls. Anyway, last day of work for me. He was supposed to show in the morning. He didn't. It's getting later and I need to eat. I told the assistant manager that if the DM came in while I was at lunch and didn't feel I needed to return for the last hour of my shift to let me know. And then I get his call. At 55 minutes into my break time, he called to let me know that if I didn't return when my break was completed, he would terminate me for job abandonment. So here is where malicious compliance comes in. Company policy stated the even salaried employees were entitled to 60 minutes of uninterrupted break. If there was an interruption, the 60-minute break was to start over. I informed him of this and told him his call was official business, and I would be resetting my breaks and would return in an hour. I spent the next hour shopping for something at the store next to my own, and then went over when the hour was up. I walked into the store, and as he started to talk, I told him that according to company policy, I was entitled to a 15-minute break between the end of my lunch and the end of my shift. I promptly turned my back on him and went outside to take my 15-minute break, 15 minutes before the end of my shift. When the break was over, I walked and gave the key to the assistant manager and walked out. The DM started to follow me out and started trying to ask me questions about the store. I told him, as a former employee of this company, I felt very harassed by my former boss attempting to follow me to my car, and I would get the police involved if he did not leave me alone immediately. About 2 weeks later, I stopped by the store to see how the employees were and pick up the one thing I had forgotten to take with me. It turns out that the DM had been in our store for the last 2 weeks every day as the acting store manager, since there was no one left as a manager in any of his stores. Turns out he apparently had no idea how the stores actually worked. He had wanted me to come back from lunch so I could show him how to do my job. I'm glad he showed up so late, because had he been on time, I would have been obliged to show him. The day before my post-employment visit, he had gotten a surprise visit at my old store by his boss. She fired him on the spot. He had a company car he was allowed to clean out, but then had to turn over the keys. So there he was, an hour away from home, jobless, carless, and clueless. And I don't quite feel bad for not feeling bad about that. About a month later, about 2 months after I quit, I got a letter in the mail. Inside was a certificate of appreciation thanking me for my year of service and looking forward to the years to come, from a place I had quit month or so ago, with less than a year of employment. Turns out the DM had put me on unpaid leave instead of accepting my 2 weeks because he was going to get fired if he lost another manager. Ignore me when I tell you the counterfeit machine is broken? Enjoy $40 in counterfeit bills. So this happened a couple of years ago, and I finally found the right subreddit to post this, so here it goes. I worked at a fast food restaurant, and we had a scanner machine to check if money is real or not. One day, I touched the machine's sensor and noticed that it still scanned my hand as money. I did this with paper as well and concluded that the machine was broken. During the same shift, I had the one manager that did nothing but sit on her ass all day and only help us with orders if we were behind orders by 20+ minutes. I tell her about the machine and she says she'll check it later. See, I'm supposed to scan a bill that is $10 or $20, and for $50 or $100, I have to give it to a manager to check. A few hours go by and she still hasn't checked it, and by this point I'm checking every bill that's $10 or $20 by holding it up to a light, which can be seen as rude to a customer. One customer complains to me and calls my manager over. This customer complained how I was discriminating her. I wasn't, and I shouldn't be checking a $10 bill like she's a criminal. Instead of defending me, as the machine was broken and she hasn't checked it, she began yelling at me in front of this customer. I told her that the machine was broken and I needed to check each bill, the same I would if the machine was working. She then, without even checking the machine, said to just use the machine and said who would even use a counterfeit on a $10 or $20 bill. I decided the argument wasn't worth $9 an hour and just complied. I quickly scanned every bill until I saw two shady-acting women. The first woman handed me a $20 bill that was obviously fake. I didn't even have to check it. It felt and looked like paper. I decided I would just follow orders and scan it. Since it went off, I put it in the register. The second customer came and handed me a similar counterfeit bill. I did the same thing. Later, when my shift was about to end, my manager counted my drawer and found the two counterfeit bills and freaked out at me. I zone out for most of it, but most of it consisted of her calling me dumb for not noticing this obvious counterfeit and how I'm going to get fired. Well, what actually happened was the regional and general managers called me over to fire me before I told them the story. They then checked the cameras and listened to our conversation about the machine being broken, then concluded that the manager was in the wrong for one, not letting me check the bills, and two, telling me to use the machine that I explained was broken. She was then fired and saw her working the cash register at a grocery store. Hopefully she checks if she gets any counterfeit bills. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.